Part 17. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 161. The cold rain is coming over the city, and the cold wind is like a knife. As night covered the sky of Chang'an City, thousands of lights lit up in the thousands of streets and hundreds of squares, until they spread to the end of the field of vision. Kong Renfang, Criminal Investigation Department. When the dusk drum sounded, the wolf guards returned to the yamen one after another. When they saw the three chief officials walking out together, they all raised their hands and saluted. Zhang Xiang walked in the front with a wild goose feather sword hanging on his waist, holding an oil paper umbrella and entering the rain curtain, still arranging things in the department. Yunlin, the envoy from the northern Qi dynasty, arrived in Chang'an in the middle of the month. According to the news reported by the boys, a disciple of the imperial master of the northern Qi dynasty was accompanying him. I guess he also heard about the selection of the 10 military leaders by the Holy Emperor. Please contact Sidu Huyu and Tangju, lest someone provokes someone and no one responds, which will damage the face of the Holy Emperor. Don't worry, Mr. Zhang. The man named Zhou is only 20 years old. No matter how powerful the master is, he can't be much more powerful. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in Chang'an City. No one can deal with it. The two chief officers walked in front, followed by Tianwei camp leader Zhang Tingbao and another leader, helping to hold umbrellas. Zhang Tingbao was originally a beggar in the market, but later he was favored by Zhang Xiang, who entered the official career, and brought him back to be his apprentice, and he was also regarded as his godson. Hearing the conversation between the two superiors, Zhang Tingbao pressed the Yanling knife and showed some emotion, and said, "Dad, how about I go meet that barbarian from northern Qi?" Zhang Xiang shook his head. Warriors must learn to hide their sharp edges. This kind of publicity is not suitable for us to do. Zhang Tingbao was a little disappointed when he heard this, but it was expected. As a small yamen under the imperial guard, the detective department is strictly the emperor's bodyguard. However, the direct boss of the detective department is the emperor of the day. His spies and backstabs are all over Daewoo, and any information can be bypassed. Passing through Sangong and Juking, it reaches Tianting, which is the falcon in the hands of the emperor. His position is not high, but he has a lot of power, so he naturally has to keep a low profile. Naturally, he will not be allowed to do such a thing that is in the limelight. During the discussion, the four of them walked to a house near Kong Renfang. The house was the residence of Wolf Guard, and Zhang Xiang and Lu Yunlin also lived here. The spring rain was lingering and it was nighttime, so the alley was a little dark. The raindrops fell from the edge of the umbrella ribs and landed on the bluestone floor tiles, making a crisp sound. Zhang Tingbao lived nearby and was about to say goodbye. Zhang Xiang, who was walking in front, raised his hand to stop, moved his ears slightly, and looked at the corner of the alley ahead. Zhang Xiang was originally a soldier of the secret guard, and because of Iron Eagle's ability to hunt deer, he was already famous throughout the world, and his martial arts skills were definitely the highest among the four. The deputy envoy Lu Yunlin was selected from the army. He was a distant relative of Lu Pingyang, the current Taiwei. His martial arts skills were slightly inferior, but he was definitely not mediocre. He stopped almost at the same time and put his hand on the handle of the Yanling Dao. Superior. Zhang Tingbao and the other leader did not notice anything strange, but they had already guessed it from their reactions. Their expressions darkened and they stood still. Swish swish. In the night, all that was left was the sound of rain in an instant. The four core figures of the detective department, dressed in black, were holding their swords on their waists and motionless, as if there were suddenly no living things in the alley. Zhang Xiang looked at the alley corner in the distance, gently rubbed his fingers with his left hand behind his back, and said, "He Fang Xiao Xiao, come out and talk." Zhang Tingbao was raised by Zhang Xiang and knew the movements of his adoptive father's hands very well, he would rub his fingers only when he met a difficult person. Of course, it was not that he felt it was difficult, but that his hands were itchy. Thinking of this, Zhang Tingbao showed some caution on his face. The most powerful person in the criminal investigation department is definitely not Zhang Xiang. There are 3 people on the same level as Zhang Xiang. One controls the intelligence network and no one knows who he is. The other travels around the world and shocks the world. This does not include AncientChina among the secret guards behind him. Et al. But Zhang Xiang can serve as the external face of the criminal investigation department, and his skills go without saying. His Bagua knife is famous all over the world. The only person who can make Zhang Xiang difficult to deal with is at least one of the celebrities in the world. The words rang out in the dark alley, and there was silence at the corner of the alley ahead. The 4 of them waited quietly for a long time before inaudible footsteps sounded. They stepped through the water on the bluestone floor tiles and revealed a figure. Wearing a raincoat and a bamboo hat, he held an ordinary iron sword. The blade was painted black to prevent reflection, and his face was covered with a scarf. The rainwater slid down from the black sword's edge, and the sword's blade did not fluctuate at all when walking. This steady strength alone was not something that ordinary Jianghu people could achieve. Seeing this outfit, Zhang Tingbao immediately knew that he was another one seeking revenge. 10 years ago, in Taiying Lilu, the heads of Jianghu people who died in the criminal investigation department were piled up like a mountain. Although the Jianghu people said they must take revenge when they have time, they definitely did not dare to seek revenge from the emperor. The other secret guards were hiding in secret and did not know their identities. The only enemy he could find was Zhang Xiang. Speaking of which, the head of the criminal investigation department can be regarded as a scapegoat. There are hundreds of thousands of blood feuds. Zhang Xiang, no matter how fast his knife is, can't really slaughter 10,000 people. If he puts 10,000 pigs there for him to kill, he can still do it. Cut the roll with a knife. But as the emperor's confidant, he naturally can't explain anything to the people in the world, and he doesn't need to explain anything. Zhang Xiang looked him up and down and said in a deep voice, "He Fang Xiao, tell me your name to save yourself the trouble of verifying your identity afterwards." The swordsman in coir raincoat stood motionless in the alley, raised his head slightly and said nothing. Ta-ta! Raindrops slipped from the umbrella ribs and sword blades, and shattered on the stone bricks. There were 5 people standing in the alley, but there was no sound of breathing. The depressing atmosphere spread. Zhang Tingbao held the umbrella handle tightly. After a long time, he finally couldn't help it and took a deep breath. Sa. At this moment, the swordsman in coir raincoat flipped his sword with his wrist, causing the raindrops falling from above to shoot out. Whispering, rustling. The sword edge followed closely behind, crossing the distance of more than 10 feet without a sound. The blade of the sword was like a dragon exploring the sea, stabbing Zhang Xiang's throat. Cha! The 4 Yanling knives were unsheathed at the same time, and a chilling cold light emerged in the dark alley. The stone bricks under Zhang Xiang's feet cracked instantly, and then he flew forward. There were only 4 Yanling knives, but they were like 100 knives coming out in the narrow alley. The blades were like ocean waves, pressing unstoppably towards the coir raincoat swordsman. Ah! Ding ding ding! In the blink of an eye, dozens of sparks burst out in the sky. The swordsman in coir raincoat was like a flying dragon and a flying phoenix, fighting 1 against 4. His swords were so intertwined that it was almost impossible to penetrate them with water. More than a dozen sword marks instantly appeared on the walls and the ground on both sides. Tang family sword. Zhang Xiang struck out 3 times in a row, but was almost pierced through the heart by one sword. He recognized that the swordsman's moves were the secret skills of the Tang family in Yuzhu. Without saying a word, the swordsman in coir raincoat knocked the Yanling Dao away from Zhang Tingbao's hand with just 2 sword strikes. If Zhang Xiang had not rescued him in time, Zhang Tingbao would have been killed by 1 sword. Lu Yunlin frowned, seemingly surrounded, but calmly took a step behind Zhang Xiang. The swordsman in coir raincoat seemed to have only Zhang Xiang as his target, and ignored the other three people at all. His sword was flying in and out of the rain, stabbing Zhang Xiang's vital points with every move, and he actually gained a slight upper hand. There is no chance for masters to exchange hundreds of moves and roar twice. One or two moves can be enough to make the difference between life and death. But in the blink of an eye, a bloody mouth appeared on the chest of a leader who followed. Zhang Xiang's sword ghost split the blade in time, and he tried to pull away the leader of the wolf guard, but a flaw was revealed. The swordsman in coir raincoat narrowed his eyes slightly, seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and stabbed Zhang Xiang's heart sharply with his sword. Father! Zhang Tingbao, who had just taken a few steps away, saw a sudden change in his face and rushed forward to block the sword. Unfortunately, it was impossible for a person to run faster than a sword. The tip of the sword of the coir raincoat swordsman hit Zhang Xiang's heart. Bite! The tip of the sword penetrated the robe, and the sound it made was the crisp sound of gold and iron clashing. The tip of the iron sword in the coir raincoat guest's hand pierced the hem of his clothes and could no longer be kept in. It was forcefully bent out of an arc, and then broke into two sections. Zhang Xiang's eyes were cold and cold. He had been assassinated overt and covered for many years and had to block the sword for the Holy Emperor. How could he be unprepared and expose his flaws in a hurry just for the sake of a subordinate? It was too much to underestimate Zhang Xiang. Snap! At the same moment when the iron sword broke, Zhang Xiang struck out with his backhand, with great force and force, his sleeves made an explosion. When the sword was broken, the swordsman in coir raincoat secretly thought something was wrong, and forced himself to retreat to dodge, but was still slapped on the shoulder. Bang! The brown leaves on the coir raincoat suddenly swelled up like a hedgehog, and then the whole person was blown away. The other three were not idle either. Lu Yunlin had just gotten closer and seemed to be using his sword. However, 3 black poisonous needles were silently thrown out of his sleeves and pierced directly into the ribs of the coir raincoat swordsman who was blocking the sword with a broken sword. The swordsman in coir raincoat was shaken more than 10 feet away by a palm. He fell on the bluestone floor and slid a few steps. His body bounced up again smoothly. Without hesitation, he threw the broken sword towards Zhang Xiang who was chasing him, turned around and jumped. He went up the wall and disappeared. Chase! Zhang Xiang split the broken sword, and the 4 of them jumped onto the wall at the same time, chasing the rising and falling figures in front of them. Lu Yunlin's eyes were cold, and he snorted against the back of the coir raincoat guest, "This poisonous needle blocks the blood and qi. Shui can't even practice his kung fu. This thief can't run very far." Although the fight lasted only a blink of an eye, Zhang Tingbao was already covered in sweat, his face turned pale, and he said, "Who is he? His martial arts skills are really great." Zhang Xiang frowned. Apart from knowing how to use the Tang family sword, he didn't know his identity. He waved his hand and said, "You two go back to treat your injuries first, while Yunlin and I will chase you. Promise." Zhang Tingbao paused when he heard this and watched the 3 figures chasing each other disappear among the brightly lit buildings. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 162. It was drizzling, and in a tavern in Kongrenfang Market, several dishes of side dishes were placed on the table, and the lanterns outside the window were swaying in the night rain. Because of the rain, the people who couldn't walk around in the streets sat in the wine shops and tea shops, and there was a lot of noise and commotion everywhere. Su Buling sat at the wine table by the window, listening to the storyteller telling bizarre stories from all over the world. There are a bunch of items on hand, such as rouge boxes, wine jars, pastry boxes, etc., all prepared for the Queen Mother. Zhu Manzi sat across from the wine table, occasionally taking a sip from the wine bowl that was bigger than his face. He took the opportunity to sneak a sideways look at Su Buling, and then sat down properly. In the afternoon, Zhu Manzi accompanied Su Buling to Xianzizai to pick and choose. Finally, Su Buling chose rouges such as red orchid nectar and camellia butter. There are many types of lipstick, with colors ranging from dark to light. Women from good families in the market mostly prefer light colors, while girls from Gulen brothels prefer dark red. Zhu Manzi is a girl no matter what, so she knows a lot about these things. Xianzizai's signature lip balm Red Orchid Nectar, a box of which earns her a month's salary, is mostly used by wealthy women. She just took a sneak peek and saw that the color of the lipstick was very bright and inappropriate for a young girl who had not yet left the court. It looked, well, like it was bought for a woman who is not satisfied with her desires. After realizing this, Zhu Manzi felt strange in her heart. She met Mrs. Lu once outside the palace. She seemed to be a dignified and conservative woman. She would definitely not use red orchid nectar, if she didn't buy it for her elders. Zhu Manzi picked up the wine bowl and took a sip, then looked at Su Buling's stern profile. Mr. Su is so handsome and young, he must have been deceived by some slutty women. Zhu Manzi had heard rumors about some sluts. Because of their high status, they did not respect etiquette and kept a lot of faces. Those faces were probably like Mr. Su, who was handsome, young, and in great shape. Thinking of this, Zhu Manzi felt aggrieved, as if the male god he liked had been ruined. What a good young master, and he has no shortage of money. How could he go back and do that kind of thing? He must have been deceived by a bad woman. After thinking about it, Zhu Manzi finally couldn't help it, put down the wine bowl and whispered. Mr. Su, who did you buy these things for? Su Buling tapped his fingers on the table and said casually, Woman, didn't you just say that? Oh, Mr. Su, there are a lot of bad people in Chang'an City. I work in the detective department, and I often hear gossip from my brothers. Well, there are some ladies who look dignified, but what's going on behind their backs? Su Buling frowned, turned around, and looked at the shy Xiao Manzi. You're talking about this, I'm not bored anymore, please tell me carefully. Zhu Manzi was a little embarrassed, but he was born with a carefree temperament. Seeing that Su Buling was interested, he didn't hesitate. I secretly heard from the good people in the Yamen. Well, there are several wives of the princes on Kuishao Street. On the surface, they are dignified, but after the death of the old prince, they became a little unruly. Su Buling had heard Mrs. Lu say that these parents were mean-spirited, and shook his head and said, Kuishao Street is mostly a marriage between aristocratic families, and there is no relationship between husband and wife. It is difficult to remarry after the husband dies of illness, and it is difficult to manage a pretty boy secretly, but after all, it's a minority. Zhu Manzi nodded. Actually, those ladies are very polite, but a good girl can't stand a pestering man. I heard that some men with ill intentions go out to seduce such widowed ladies. Su Buling always felt that these words were talking about him, so he shook his head and chuckled, maybe I love my concubine, but I just can't express it openly. Zhu Manzi's face turned red and he shook his head. No, a true gentleman would never catch the attention of these ladies. Those who do this are all bad men with smooth tongues and no tricks. Dare to use it? However, those rich ladies are also strange. They have always asked for marriage and remarry, but they can't let go of their dignity. They can't hide in secret, so they just accept it. Sigh, to put it bluntly, you are still lusting after men, just like Mr. Su. Those ladies can't do anything to you and they dare not speak out, so what else can they do? After a little taste of the sweetness, I will turn around to protect you. Su Buling raised his hand and pinched her face. You're not old, but you know a lot. Zhu Manzi's face was pulled round, and he pushed Su Buling's hand away with some trepidation. I also heard from hearsay that there were ladies who had done this before and were discovered by their heirs, and asked the wolf guards to bury those men secretly. As a result, those ladies went on a hunger strike at home and hanged themselves. They couldn't tell the suffering of their sons and nephews, but in the end they still became forget it if you didn't see it. Su Buling shook his head secretly. If the affair between him and the Queen Mother was discovered, the Emperor would definitely bury him. If only it were that simple. After muttering and chatting for a while, the two of them suddenly heard a few soft, inaudible click-click sounds on the roof. Su Buling's ears twitched slightly. He raised his eyes to look at the roof of the tavern, and then looked at the street. Zhu Manzi was still muttering about the face thing, when he saw Su Buling's movements and followed his gaze out the window. He saw a sword sound suddenly erupted on the rainy long street, and 3 figures fell on the street. The cold light of the sword was threatening. The leader of the man in coir raincoat had an extremely ferocious aura. He was holding a branch as a sword, and he still wielded it to prevent splashing water. However, he seemed to be injured, and his steps were a little erratic in his movements. The 2 people chasing after him were dressed in black wolf guard clothes. Zhu Manzi recognized them at a glance as the chief officer and deputy envoy of the detective department. Ah! Look! After listening to the storyteller's words, the men in several wine shops and tea shops around the street turned their heads. Because of the night, there were many wolf guards living nearby in the wine shop and tea shop. After discovering that the chief officer was arresting the thief, many people got up and rushed out of the wine shop and tea shop to support them. Zhu Manzi raised his hand and grabbed the Yanling knife on the table and was about to stand up, but his shoulder was held down by a big hand. Don't be impatient, this thief is quite powerful. This is nonsense. If it wasn't powerful, it wouldn't have alerted Zhang Xiang and Lu Yunlin to pursue him personally. Zhu Manzi originally wanted to fish in troubled waters to avoid being found out by the chief, but after hearing Su Buling's dissuasion, he naturally did not dare to act rashly and sat back obediently. On the street, Zhang Xiang saw the wolf guards coming to support him. Unexpectedly, he sent weapons to the thieves and said loudly, "Back off. Promise." A dozen or so wolf guards in regular uniforms issued orders and stopped, holding weapons they found and scattered in all directions, chasing after the 2 chief officers. The cloaked man was obviously staggering, and could no longer run at top speed. He turned around from time to time, holding a branch as a sword, and blocked the fierce blades one after another. Because they were poisoned, Zhang Xiang and Lu Yunlin held single knives and circled behind the coir raincoat guest. They only attacked tentatively and were not in a hurry to confront him head-on. It looked like they wanted to kill the coir raincoat guest. The surrounding wolf guards also discovered that the cory clothes guest was at the end of his strength. His offensive was not powerful at all, and he could barely protect himself. Naturally, they would not steal the chief officer's limelight at this time, and a few quick-thinking people even began to cheer for the chief officer to help him out. Zhu Manzi originally wanted to chase him out to watch the fun, but then he remembered that Su Buling was embarrassed behind his back, so he turned around and asked with a smile, "Mr. Su, should we follow and watch the fun?" Su Buling frowned and thought for a moment, then raised his hand and patted her shoulder. "You go home first, I will come to you later." After saying that, he stood up and went into the back kitchen of the tavern. Zhu Manzi blinked, understanding that Su Buling must have gone to watch the fun without her, and said oh slightly unhappily, "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 163. Tread. The sound of hurried steps echoed very far on the street, and the chilly raindrops hit the black stone bricks of the street. The blades rose and fell, and the eyes of each pair were like evil wolves. The coir raincoat guest was breathing rapidly, and the branches in his hands kept swatting away the Yanling Dao coming from behind. However, his movements became slower and slower, and it became more and more difficult to parry. The poison of the poisonous needle under his ribs has spread to the left half of his body. His movements are stiff and slow, and he gradually loses consciousness. Although he has not yet fallen, he is already in death. Zhang Xiang and Lu Yunlin had been chasing for so long, and there was a bit of surprise in their eyes. Such skills were rare in the world. If they hadn't accidentally been poisoned by a poisonous needle, Zhang Xiang alone might not have been able to do anything. The more desperate the situation, the more ferocious the desperate counterattack. Zhang Xiang was involved in the world 10 years ago. Naturally, no one needs to remind him of this. Even though the man in raincoat on the other side was exhausted, he did not rush forward to take his head. Dang dang! The branches hit the blade, making a crisp sound like gold and iron clashing. The wolf guards who were chasing after him also saw that this man in raincoat was not an ordinary person. With a cautious expression, he followed the two chief officers cautiously and did not dare to rush in. Having run so far, there were more and more pursuers. The man in the raincoat seemed to know that he could not escape with his wings. When he landed on a street, he suddenly stopped. His body suddenly turned from rushing forward to retreating, and he slashed back with his right hand towards the front. Zhang Xiang from behind. The light branches stretched as straight as steel whips, and there was a crisp sound of snap, shattering the raindrops all over the sky. It may seem like a powerful force, but it's actually a devastating blow. It's a pity that Zhang Xiang is in charge of the Criminal Investigation Department and is involved in martial arts all over the world. The Tang family has a close relationship with the imperial court, and the Tang family sword's various killing moves are already familiar to him. The moment the coy raincoat guest stopped, Zhang Xiang's eyes showed a bit of contempt, and he turned from offense to defense with his blade lying in front of him, catching the branch that was chopped back just in time. Cha! The branch broke off when it came into contact with the blade. The front half continued to hit Zhang Xiang under the action of inertia, but Zhang Xiang tilted his head and bit it with his teeth, and was unharmed. The cloaked man missed his target with one blow, and it was already too late to escape. Lu Yunlin overtook him from the side, blocked the street with his sword, and sneered. "Let's see where you go." Zhang Xiang had no intention of touching the dying tiger. He stood behind with a single knife in hand, the tip of the knife pointed diagonally at the ground, and rainwater fell from the bleeding groove of the Yanling knife. "I'll capture you without any help, tell me your identity, and give you a way to survive." This statement is nothing more than destroying the opponent's fighting spirit. The Criminal Investigation Department is not a gangster and operates according to the law. Assassinating the chief officer of the Criminal Investigation Department is a capital crime. How can he survive? The coy raincoat guest was breathing rapidly and glanced back and forth. The wolf guards behind him also caught up, blocking all escape routes in all directions. It was already a dead end and there was no way to escape. Zhang Xiang naturally would not step on the thunder in a hurry for quick success. He kept his distance with the knife and said coldly, "You're good at martial arts. Are you from the Tang family? What grudges do you have against me?" Lin Yike stood on the street surrounded by powerful enemies, still looking for an opportunity to escape. The surrounding shops and people all ran back into the house, closed the doors and windows, and looked between the cracks in the doors. Zhang Xiang waited for a moment, and when the other party didn't speak, he raised his hand. Several Tianzi camp wolf guards immediately went up to test with their swords, and Zhang Xiang followed closely, looking for an opportunity to give the thief a fatal blow. Ah! Even though he was in a desperate situation, the man in raincoat still refused to give up and let out an extremely suppressed cry. He couldn't tell whether he was male or female. His body, which had been drained of oil and dried up, suddenly became more powerful and rushed towards the house on the side. Sucker punch! With a sarcastic look on his face, Lu Yunlin strode forward and chased after him. Tap tap tap. The sound of messy footsteps ran over the houses on the street. Many tiles and beams were cracked under the steps, making a crackling sound. The couple working below occasionally uttered a few swear words. Zhang Xiang rushed forward with a single sword in his hand, his eyes locked on Corey Yi's body like an eagle, and the distance quickly closed. Soon, the cloaked man jumped across an alley and staggered when he landed on the roof on the other side. In this moment of delay, Zhang Xiang had already swooped out, leaped in the air behind the coir raincoat guest, and slashed out with the blade in his hand without any hesitation. The man in raincoat tried his best to dodge sideways. At this moment, a sharp scream suddenly came from the alleyway under his feet. A hit! Zhang Xiang was in the mid-air between two houses. He never expected that someone was hiding in the alley to attack him. He didn't realize it until he heard the sound of his clothes ripping in the wind. In an instant, his hair stood on end. He had been walking on the edge of a knife for many years, and he still felt this palpitating. First time. Amidst the strange screams, the expressions of all the wolf guards suddenly changed. Looking up, he saw a figure soaring into the sky between the houses in front of him, like a sharp arrow that came off the string, leaving only an after-image. Zhang Xiang glanced downwards from the corner of his eye, and saw that the fist of the figure wrapped in cloth was already approaching. At the critical moment, Zhang Xiang tried his best to turn the Yanling saber downwards, but unfortunately he was caught off guard and blocked it too hastily, and was still hit in the chest by a punch from bottom to top. Bang! Zhang Xiang's breath condensed, and his face turned red instantly. Two figures collided in the air above the alley, and the people coming suddenly stopped. Zhang Xiang's strong body was like a polo ball being pulled high into the sky by a stick. He could be seen in several alleys around like the sky monkey. Hiss! The dozen or so wolf guards present looked at it with horror in their eyes and stopped without hesitation. Even if it was a sneak attack, not many people could hit Zhang Xiang so high with one punch, and the force was too much. The figure wrapped in cloth from head to toe, after releasing Zhang Xiang with a Lushan Shenlong Ba, did not stop, and landed on the roof. He raised his hand and caught the shaky straw raincoat man under his armpit, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Zhang Xiang fell from a high altitude and smashed a gap in the roof, shocking the men and women below to scream. "You despicable villain, don't run!" Lu Yunlin chased a few steps with a knife, but was worried about being ambushed, so he stopped after a dry roar. At this time, the wolf guard came back to his senses, holding the knife and looking at the direction where the thieves fled, a little hesitant. "Deputy Envoy Lu, are you going to chase them?" The meaning of this sentence is naturally to let Lu Yunlin lead the way, but Lu Yunlin didn't know how many thieves there were on the other side, so he naturally wouldn't take risks. He lowered his head and looked at Zhang Xiang in the hole in the roof. Ahem, ahem, ahem. Zhang Xiang was in a mess. He climbed out of the house with a knife in hand, jumped onto the roof from the cave, gritted his teeth and pulled open his clothes, revealing the breastplate underneath. A striking dent appeared on the smooth breastplate. When he pulled the breastplate out, his muscular chest was covered with bruises. "Pa!" Zhang Xiang spat, threw the breastplate on the ground, put away the goose feather knife in his hand and snorted coldly. "Forget it, I can't catch up, I'll withdraw, it's really humming despicable." Yes. Seeing that the chief officer was defeated, the wolf guards naturally didn't dare to say anything more. They looked at the direction where the thieves left, then put away their knives and scattered away. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 164. On a cold spring night, the drizzle moistens everything and is silent. In the deep streets and alleys, Su Buletinling had a coir raincoat on his shoulder and a vermilion wine gourd in his left hand, taking a sip from time to time. The rags on his body had been torn off, but the water stains left on his raincoat still stained his plain white robe. Since he couldn't hold an umbrella, some raindrops hung on his hair and cheeks. The reason why he took action to save the man in raincoat clothes just now was because Su Buling had seen Ning Qingyi's move, which was the Tang family sword. This man in raincoat clothes also used the Tang family sword. The Tang family and the Zhou family in Yuzhou both used swords and were quite famous in the world. They had been competing with each other for hundreds of years. The Tang family was naturally involved in the killing of the old sword master Zhou Silk Mountain 10 years ago. The Tang family should also have some relationship with locking Dragon Gu. This is enough. Even if I can't ask anything, judging from what I just saw, this raincoat man is very skilled in martial arts. Judging from Zhang Xiang's coping methods, I'm afraid he is still better than Zhang Xiang. This kind of thug is not easy to find. Even Prince Su's mansion will treat him with courtesy. You can form a good relationship with a little effort and there will be no loss. While walking, Su Buring waited a little. The coir raincoat guest was about the same weight as Aunt Lu. She felt like a woman, but she was covered so tightly that she couldn't see her face. She had already fainted and didn't know what she had suffered. Hurt. Su Buling thought for a while, hung the wine gourd on his waist, raised his hand and reached under the raincoat. Through the thin clothes, he could feel that his skin was hot, and he obviously had a fever. Woo! The woman lying on Su Buling's shoulder was touched on the waist, and she obviously felt the touch, and she murmured angrily. Su Buling frowned. Girl. No response. Seeing this, Su Buling quickened his pace, came to the uninhabited courtyard that he secretly bought, and crossed the wall into the small house where Ning Qingyi used to live. Closing the door with your foot, the sound of rain outside quieted down, and the room was dark. Su Buling put the fainted woman down based on his memory, turned around, found a flint on the table, and lit the oil lamp, and finally there was some light in the room. Ning Qingyi had lived in the house for so long, so it was impossible not to clean it up. At this time, the house was clean, but there were not many objects, just a plank bed and a few benches. A small stove and medicine jars were placed in the corner, and there were also piles of broken jade burners. There. Ning Qingyi bought these trivial items at the market and did not take them away. At this time, the bed was still covered with quilts. Su Buling wiped his hands with a towel, walked to the bed with an oil lamp, and turned over the woman in raincoat lying on it. The bamboo hat has fallen on the road, but the black cloth is still covering the head, only a pair of closed eyes are exposed, with slender eyebrows, long eyelashes, and no wrinkles at the corners of the eyes. Even with the eyes closed, there is something touching. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, a little surprised. Putting the oil lamp on the windowsill next to her, she took out the woman's arm and pressed her fingers on her wrist to feel her pulse. Her hand was hot and soft, and her arm was already red. Poisoned. Su Buling's face looked a little more serious. He raised his hand and opened the woman's right eye and looked at it under the light. There was no sparkle in his autumn-like eyes. If someone is poisoned in a fight, it is obviously impossible to take it orally, it is either a hidden weapon or a poisonous mist. Su Buling pulled off the black cloth wrapped around his head, and a pale cheek came into view. No makeup was applied, and his hair was only tied on his head with a rope. Even so, there is something indescribably beautiful about a bare face with no blood color. Every aspect is just right and very attractive, but if you look closely, you can't tell what's good about it, and you can't even tell your age. The scent was about to fade away, and Su Buring didn't have time to look carefully. He held his chin with his hand, opened his thin lips, and checked his throat and nose. There were no traces of anything unusual. It's not poisonous mist. Su Bulenling frowned slightly, then all that was left was the hidden weapon. If the poisonous needle and flying knife were not taken out, no matter how much medicine he took, it would not help. Fortunately, flying knives can be shot anywhere, but poisonous needles can be fired anywhere, which is more troublesome than finding warheads for the wounded on the battlefield. Following the urgency of the matter, Su Buling did not hesitate so much. He raised his hand and untied the laces of the raincoat, revealing the dark black close-fitting military uniform underneath. He first checked the neck and back of the head. If there was no injury, he began to untie it. Opened the laces of the black clothes. Woo! The woman fainted, but still responded. She moved her fingers slightly, obviously resisting. You are almost dead, and you still think about these things. Su Buring shook his head and untied his black clothes. Instead of wearing a belly band, it was wrapped with white cloth, which was wrapped very tightly. This should be done so as not to affect his hands. After a closer look, he saw that his skin was as good as snow. There was a slap mark on his shoulder that was dark blue in color, as eye-catching as ink stains on rice paper, but other than that, there were no blood stains or other injuries. Su Buling frowned, raised his hand and turned the woman over on the quilt to check her back. From the shoulders to the waist, everything was intact, and there was nothing special except that the waist was very thin. Su Buling carefully groped his back, and after making sure there were no scars, he had to raise his hand to untie the thin pants and pull them off together with the pink thin pants underneath. Because my figure was quite undulating, it was not easy to pull up, so it took me a while to throw the wet thin pants aside. Under the dusk light of the oil lamp, there are white flowers. Seeing that the woman was dying, Su Buling had no intention of admiring it. He fell down and looked carefully for any injuries. If he couldn't find any, he turned the woman over again. There was nothing unusual about her smooth and flawless skin, but there was a strange pattern on this woman's lower abdomen, which was light red and looked like a flying phoenix spreading its wings. It didn't look like a tattoo. Su Buling took a look, made a note of it for the time being, and then spread his legs apart to take a look. There was still no scar. Hey! Su Buling frowned, looked up and down, and had to untie the white cloth wrapped around his body. There was an amulet hanging around the woman's neck, engraved with the words "Slay demons, exorcise evil spirits" and the Bagua diagram. It looked like a Taoist amulet, hidden deep and a little difficult to find. Su Buling untied the white cloth and saw some black bruises under his ribs. He breathed a sigh of relief and took the oil lamp to check from below. Sure enough, there were 3 black needles. Su Buling poured a bowl of broken jade, pressed the soft ball and carefully took out the poison needle, then took out a small porcelain bottle from his arms, poured out the few remaining pills, stuffed them into the woman's mouth, and took the medicine with strong liquor. Cough, cough, cough. The woman coughed a few times, but did not wake up. Su Buling held her wrist and felt it carefully. After a while, the woman began to sweat. The black spots on her body faded quickly, and her face turned a little red. Su Buling breathed a sigh of relief. Only then did he feel like looking at her from head to toe. However, he almost had a toxic reaction after looking at her from head to toe. He had just saved someone in an emergency, but now he was taking advantage of someone's misfortune. Su Buling put on his thin white pants again, thought for a while, and got up to light the small stove. Ning Qingyi bought a lot of medicine, most of which were blood-activating and blood stasis-removing herbs. After drawing a pot of water from the well, he sat under the eaves and began to boil the medicine. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 165. Thank you Lu Lingzuo, for the reward from the leader. Thank you Cheng Shen 123 for the 20,000 reward, and thank you Yishui Hanjiakshuan Qin Su Yisen Wang Shiuduolu for the 10,000 reward. I'm currently in debt, 33/300, I'm busy typing. Russell Shesha. The spring rain hits the old windows, and a little light shines through the crooked wooden boards. The strong smell of medicine drifts in the cool air of early spring, mixed with the puff sound of the medicine pot being boiled. Woo! A weak cry sounded, and the woman covered with the quilt frowned slightly, her eyelashes trembled slightly under the dim light, and she slowly opened her eyes. The world is spinning, and she is weak all over. there is a bit of confusion and fatigue in her autumn eyes. Rustle rustle. She struggled to lift the quilt, propped up her body with her elbows, and glanced outside. The house was not big, with a few crudely made benches placed in the corner, and a raincoat still dripping with water hanging on the wall. There was nothing else. The house was bare and the windows were broken. It looked like a poor family's house, but it was very clean. She was out of danger, and she breathed a sigh of relief, and turned to look at the source of the sound. There was a small stove at the door of the house. A young man in a snow-white robe sat on a small bench, fanning the stove with a cattail leaf fan. Although the snow-white robe was stained with some water stains, it was inlaid with gold edges and flowing clouds, and it was obviously not something that ordinary dignitaries could afford. From this side, his profile was extremely handsome, and his pair of peach blossom eyes were staring at the spring rain outside, and he was in a daze. The woman's heart, which had just been put down, was lifted up again. After all, this place was obviously not the place where the noble man in front of her should appear. Could it be that the playboy took advantage of her? She looked down and found that her clothes were intact and she didn't feel anything strange. The young man in white seemed to have heard the noise in the room. He leaned back slightly and looked over here, revealing a very moving and bright smile. "Girl, are you awake?" "Oh." She endured the weakness and sat up slowly, and woke up a little. Death fight, pursued, sudden helper, carrying. All kinds of scenes before fainting came to her mind. She finally came back to her senses, with a little gratitude in her eyes, and bowed slightly to perform Taoist etiquette. "Thank you for your help, young master." The voice was naturally intimate, and even if it was weak, it made people feel like spring breeze. Su Buling put down the palm leaf fan, poured a bowl of medicine and walked into the house, chuckling. "It's just a little help, don't worry about it, young lady." The woman took a few breaths, her complexion gradually recovered, and she forced a smile. "Alas, I killed Zhang Xiang. If you save me, the murderer of the investigation bureau will definitely make trouble for you. I shouldn't save him." Hearing this, Su Buling shook his head and smiled. "I am the eldest son of Su Wang Suyu, the investigation bureau can't do anything to me. I saved you just because I can't stand them bullying the weak with their numbers." The woman was stunned and showed some surprise. "I have heard of the reputation of General Su for a long time, and you are the descendant of General Su. My name is Ning Yuhe, from Changqing Temple near Wudane Mountain, and I am called Gu Qiu Jinren. Speaking of it, I met your mother several times when I was a child." "Pa!" The pill fell to the ground and broke into pieces. Ning Yuhe was startled and raised her eyes, only to see the young man who was gentle and elegant just now staring at her in amazement, his face a little pale, not sure if it was because of his naturally pale skin or something else. Ning Yuhe thought Su Buling didn't believe it, so she smiled gently. "Your mother is the daughter of the Lu family in Donghai. When she was young, she traveled around the world and went to the Tang family once. You should have heard of my name, right? After all, there are very few people in the world who haven't heard of it." Su Buling had certainly heard of it, known as the leader of the 8 Kueis of Suan He, the eldest lady of the Tang family who made Su Danking feel that it is difficult for beauties in the world to be painted, and stopped writing, escaped from Songji and became a nun, and was Ning Qingyi's master. "I kissed Xiao Ning just a few days ago, and just now. No grass grows, steamed buns." Su Buling secretly said, "My life is over," but his expression returned to normal, and he raised his hand to perform a junior salute. "So it's Taoist Master Bai, ahem, Taoist Master Ning. I have heard of your name for a long time, but I have never seen you, so I didn't recognize you just now." Ning Yuhe blinked lightly, thought for a while, and bowed slightly to return the salute. "Prince, you are too polite. I came out to travel in the world, and my identity is not easy to show, so I disguised myself. If it weren't for the prince's rescue, I really don't know how it would end." It's just a little help. Su Buling pondered for a while, and walked back to the door to fiddle with the medicine jar. Why did Taoist Master Ning go to Zhangxiang for trouble? Logically, there should be no grudges or hatred. Ning Yuhi's face showed a bit of sadness. After hesitating for a while, he spoke, "Young master saved my life, so I won't hide it from you. I have a disciple. I take my mother's surname and she takes my surname. Her name is Ning Qingyi. I wonder if you have heard of her." Ning Qingyi. Su Buling showed a bit of surprise, turned his head and chuckled, "So she is your disciple. I was wondering why the surname is." Ning Qingyi's eyebrows condensed, and she sat up straighter. "Young master, have you met Qingyi?" Su Buling nodded. "I met her by chance a few years ago. Later, she was injured when she stabbed Zhangxiang, so she recuperated in this yard. She just left a few days ago. It's quite a coincidence that the Taoist priest came just after she left." Ning Yuhi's nervous heart was relieved, and she breathed a sigh of relief. "Qingyi is fine." She looked at Su Buling for a few times, shook her head and said, "Qingyi is stubborn. She said she was going down the mountain for a walk, but she secretly ran to the capital to seek revenge. Alas, I thought Zhangxiang had captured her. I couldn't get into the dungeon, so I wanted to ask Zhangxiang, but I didn't expect that people in the court would also attack people from behind. Thanks to the rescue of the young master." Su Buling nodded gently. Hearing Ning Yuhi's concern for Ning Qingyi in her words, he regretted meddling in other people's business. Ning Yuhi really couldn't beat him, so he just said a name. Ning Yuhi escaped from Songji's marriage, or it was Queen Dayu. After escaping from the marriage, the matter was very serious. Songji once personally pardoned Ning Yuhi. Zhangxiang must ask the emperor if he wants to kill her. With Songji's usual style, he will definitely not do such a thankless task. Now he intervened and rashly saved Ning Yuhi, and took advantage of both sides. If one of the two Nings knew about it? Su Buling felt a chill on his back, and dared not get involved with Ning Yuhi anymore. He stood up and poured another bowl of medicine and placed it beside the bed. "Ning Qingyi is fine. I'm afraid he has returned to Changqing Temple. The government must have been investigating strictly recently. Taoist priest, please go back early after dawn." Ning Qingyi picked up the medicine bowl and blew it gently, shaking his head and said, "My public identity is clean. I have something to do in the capital, so I'm not in a hurry to leave." Su Buling blinked his eyes, then "Taoist priest, please stay here. I have a special identity and cannot come here often." "Taoist priest, please don't worry." Ning Yuhi nodded, looked Su Buling up and down. "I don't need to thank you for your kindness. If you need any help, just let me know." "Okay, then I'll take my leave first." Su Buling turned around and went out to close the door, disappearing without a trace. Ning Yuhi picked up the medicine bowl and took a sip, then looked around at the somewhat shabby little house. For some reason, she always felt that the young prince just now was a little strange, as if he was eager to cut off his relationship with her. Master by Strange. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 166. Su Buling walked out of the Ning family courtyard, walked through the neighborhoods in the night rain, and returned to Kong Renfang, still feeling a little guilty. Master and apprentice in the world are like father, son, and mother. As soon as he and Ning Qingyi had a sip, he turned around and looked at his master. It was obvious that what he was doing was not human affairs. Although he was rescuing people and treating injuries, as the saying goes, a disease should not be treated without treatment, and these things should not be fussed over, but this excuse obviously did not work. At this moment, Su Buletin could only hope that Ning Yuhi would not find out and they would treat each other as if nothing had happened. Otherwise, with Ning Qingyi's temperament, he would have to chase him for thousands of miles. There are many private houses in Kongrenfang. Because Lao Qi is secretly watching, Zhu Manzi naturally knows the location of the small courtyard he rents. The word Su Buling appeared in the small yard, and there were only 3 rooms inside, the kitchen on the left and the bedroom on the right, plus a locked main room. There is nothing in the courtyard. There is a clothesline tied under the window, a few pairs of boots leaning against the wall, and a few weapons placed there. It seems that they usually practice martial arts. Su Buling listened carefully and heard steady breathing in the room. He must have been asleep. He walked to the door, raised his hand and knocked twice. Dong dong. Hoo. Didn't wake up. Su Buling frowned slightly, raised his hand and pushed it gently. The door was unlocked, obviously knowing that he would come. Squeak. The door opens and closes. Su Buling entered the small room. There was a faint fragrance in the room. Under the dim light, there were no other objects in the room except the table, cabinet, and bed. The rouge preserves purchased during the day were placed on the table, and a pair of embroidered shoes were thrown crookedly on the floor, with one of them turned over. Looking sideways, Zhu Manzi was lying on the embroidery bed in his clothes, making a big shape. He only covered his back with the quilt, but he was still lying on his stomach sideways. Well, his sleeping posture is really not very good looking. Su Buling saw that Zhu Manzi had not been awakened, and he did not want to scare the little girl, so he walked lightly and covered her with the quilt. Zhu Manzi said a vague hum and muttered in his sleep. "Mom, it's still dark, let's sleep a little longer." After Su Buling looked at it for a few times, he shook his head and chuckled. Although he was very careful, Zhu Manzi slowly opened his eyes and took a look, closed them, and opened them again. His sleepy little face slowly turned nervous, and he closed his eyes suddenly. "Ha ha ha. Stop pretending, you're already awake." Su Buling sat down next to her and raised his hand to pinch her cheek in a funny way. Zhu Manzi turned sideways nervously and pulled the quilt. Even though he was wearing clothes, he still looked embarrassed. He turned his head to avoid Su Buling's hand and whispered. "Mr. Su, why did you come here so late? I was waiting for you, but I accidentally fell asleep. There was some trouble just now, we were a little busy." "Oh." Zhu Manzi pursed his lips and smiled, glanced at Su Buling, and muttered. "Master, why don't you knock on the door? I'm a girl." Su Bulenling took a breath. To be honest, it was really difficult to think of anything else for such a cute little girl. He shook his head and said. "It's my fault. Have a good rest and come back to you in a few days." Zhu Manzi was actually still a little confused. He stood up and lifted the hair hanging down by his ears. "Without presumption, Mr. Su, please walk slowly." Su Buling said stood up and walked to the table, picked out the rouge he bought specially for Zhu Manzi and put it on the table. Zhu Manzi was stunned for a moment, looked at the rouge box on the table, and felt a little embarrassed. "Do I still have a share?" Su Buling raised his eyebrows. "After following me for a long time, you must have some reward, right?" "Thank you, Sir." Zhu Manzi pursed his lips and smiled, then stood up to see him off. Squeak. The room fell silent. Zhu Manzi stood still for a moment holding onto the door. After making sure that Su Ling would not go far, he jumped up, ran to the table, picked up the rouge box and looked at it carefully. "We." Zhu Manzi looked over and over for a while, then fell down on the quilt, rolling back and forth, not knowing what to be happy about. In the middle of the night, Su Buling returned to the palace, looking a little embarrassed and wet. The guards patrolled around the palace in shifts. Lao Xiao, who had always slept little, lit a brazier outside the study and read the pictures of jade trees in the erotic palace in his hand to read carefully. Reading erotic palace at night, I occasionally felt something, and even wrote 2 sentences in the book to comment on it, something like the gentle goose-shaped path, the graceful 9-winding corridor, the delicate flowers and weak willows, the heavy rain, the spring night is short and the love is long, I think I will be young. At that time, he was also a free man with both civil and military skills. Tap tap tap. Seeing Su Buling falling from the roof with a broken bamboo hat on his head, Lao Xiao closed the book and stuffed it into his sleeves, laughing and saying, "My young prince, I heard that there was another assassination in Kongrenfang. You went there today and I'm afraid you learned something. Do you want to send someone to keep an eye on it?" Su Buring threw the bamboo hat aside and shook the rain off his robe. "No, it has nothing to do with me this time." Lao Xiao nodded and pondered for a moment. "I heard that Su Danking is back and started painting beauties again. I wonder who will win the first prize this time. We will naturally find out in a few days." Su Buring was not interested in Su Danking, so he entered the bedroom, took out clean clothes from the cabinet and put them on. Then he took a brush from the pen holder, dipped ink and smeared it on the wall covered with rice paper, preparing for tomorrow's progress. The palace prepares. Based on his contact these days, the Queen Mother grew up in a noble family and entered the palace to be a widow. She has no social experience at all. Like Song Yufu, she is very interested in poetry, songs, and talented men and beautiful women. However, the Queen Mother is obviously more mature and opinionated than Song Yufu, and is much more difficult to deal with. It is obviously not possible without some explosive stuff. The spread rice paper on the wall is smeared with messy ink. This was originally a surprise prepared by Su Buling for Madame Lu. He promised to draw a picture for Madame Lu in the spring last time, and he has been preparing for this for a long time. It's a pity that the poison in his body is more urgent after all, so this carefully prepared gift can only be taken out to deal with the Queen Mother first. In the dead of night, listening to the rustling of the drizzle outside, Su Buling couldn't help but think of Ning Yuhi just now. Even if he was indifferent, he couldn't help but waver a little, and was a little curious. Of course, he wasn't curious about anything. After thinking for a while, Su Buling found the clean rice paper and drew the pattern above the white tiger based on his memory. The pattern should be the outline of a phoenix spreading its wings, only the size of a petal, and the light red color looks a bit tempting. Su Buling carefully observed it for a long time at that time. The pattern was definitely not a tattoo, nor did it look like it was casually drawn. A Taoist nun, who was also the most famous beauty, could not paint there for fun. Su Buling took the oil lamp and looked at it carefully for a few times. After identifying it for a long time, he guessed that it was probably something similar to Shaogongsha. It was not easy to ask Lao Xiao about the woman's place, so he could only throw it aside, fold up the paper, fly up, and take out a small wooden box from the beam. The wooden box was originally used to hold jade pendants. At this time, there was a purse in it, and the purse naturally contained the belly bands of the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu. Su Buling opened it and took a few glances, put the folded paper in it, and then put the wooden box on the beam again. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 167. Behind the Xiao family mansion on the same street, the courtyard of Jinghua Yuan was shrouded in misty rain, and a few lanterns were hung on the waterside pavilion by the lake. Before it was time to turn off the lights, Mrs. Lu was leaning on the soft couch in the boudoir, holding a newly made spring robe for Su Buling in her hand, with fine and dense patterns outlined by needle and thread. It was raining and there was nothing to do. The maids gathered around to help, chattering. "Madam, the Queen Mother has sent another message inviting the young prince to enter the palace." "Yes, I heard from the maid who came out of the palace to do the shopping that the Queen Mother has been acting weird these days. She is always in a daze by herself. In order for the young prince to enter the palace tomorrow, she has started preparing meals today. It's so grand. The young prince seems to have gone out today." Chirping, Several maids seemed to be reporting on their work, talking about the news they had learned. Mrs. Lu sat sideways on the soft couch, holding needle and thread, with a dignified and peaceful expression, as if she didn't care. She just kept it for a short time, then sighed quietly, turned around and continued embroidering. She went back and forth like this countless times. Yunu sat sideways on the blanket next to Mrs. Lu's legs and held the solace of Su Buling's shoes. She had been with Mrs. Lu since she was a child, so she knew Mrs. Lu's character. If she continued to listen, she might have to get up and look for Su Buling. Then he smiled and said, "The young prince has a stable temperament and will not go out to flirt with women. A few days ago, he said he was interested in Miss Song. Look, now, the prince doesn't even go to the Imperial Academy." When Mrs. Lu heard this, she felt warm in her heart, but after thinking about it, she felt something was wrong and said softly, "Yunu, is it possible that your daughter feels that I, the aunt, is bossing me around, so I draw a clear line with Miss Song? How can this work? Then I have become an unreasonable elder." Yunu pursed her lips and smiled, not knowing how to answer. Mrs. Lu embroidered flowers for a while, feeling a little unable to sit still. She put down her needle and thread, obviously wanting to go to Su Buling to explain herself. Yunu was helpless and had no choice but to persuade, "Madam, you are overthinking it. After the young prince came to Chang'an, he will listen to Madam in everything. If there is a girl he likes, he will definitely bring it to Madam first. Madam knows how to be polite and will not stop her look at him, the young prince must know this truth." Mrs. Lu pursed her lips and sighed lightly, "People always grow up, but he has become more and more disobedient recently. He promised not to go to the palace, but ended up running to the palace every 3 days without knowing it. What fun things are there in the palace. I'm afraid that in a few days, I will change my mind about calling the Queen Mother aunt." Yunu smiled tenderly, "How is it possible? We, the maids, all watch the young prince's feelings for the madam. Who on Kuishao Street does not envy the madam? The Queen Mother must be jealous of the madam, so she often calls the young prince into the palace. The young prince is so kind. It's hard to say no, it's impossible not to agree." Mrs. Lu held the embroidery needle and was silent for a moment. "The Queen Mother has always had this temper. She fights for it and fights with everyone." A little maid next to her thought about it for a while, and then came up with a bad idea with a smile, "Madam, how about when the young prince comes to the palace tomorrow, you can follow him and have a look?" Mrs. Lu's eyes lit up, but she immediately shook her head, "Forget it, your child has his own opinion. What are you saying if I follow you? Hey, Madam is going to visit the Queen Mother, not with the young prince. Yes, the Xiao family will stir up some messy things, and I don't know what methods the Queen Mother will use to please the young prince. After all, the young prince is young and has not been deeply involved in the world. What if he gets into trouble and he and his wife are no longer close in the future?" Muttering. Mrs. Lu's mind was filled with Su Buletin, and she naturally became more and more upset the more she listened. Finally, she couldn't listen any more. She put her robe aside and waved her hand. "Okay, let's go to bed. I have my own rules." "Oh." Several maids responded angrily, got up, packed their things, and exited the room one after another. It rains continuously at night and the green lights are faint. The sound of raindrops hitting the windowsill echoed in my ears. The boudoir, which was not big or small, still looked like it did when I first got married. Mrs. Lu raised her cheeks and looked at the lights on the stage. She thought about it for a long time and unknowingly recalled the scenes from the past. I was 12 or 13 years old at that time, and I had just become sensible. The sister Jin Lan whom I admired the most has married away to Suzhou, leaving her alone to look at the green walls and white tiles of the yard every day, looking forward to the day when she can go out. She also fantasized about riding a horse and wielding a sword, and walking around the world like her sister. But she is a woman from a scholarly family, and the world does not belong to her. The days passed quickly, and in a blink of an eye, it was the age of cardamom. A sedan chair stopped in front of the door. Before she even thought about raising a husband and raising children, she had become the wife of a stranger. As the legitimate daughter of an aristocratic family, she had no choice and could not escape from the marriage. She remembers crying loudly at that time, and then she got on the sedan chair and entered the Xiao family's door. Speaking of which, she was still somewhat looking forward to the unfamiliar life in the future. After all, her mother had taught her since she was a child that women always have to get married. But she didn't expect that after entering the Xiao family, time seemed to freeze, and there was no trace of brilliance from then on. The husband was seriously ill and could not even let outsiders get close to him. He moved to this villa just after they got married. He could only look at his nominal husband from the window every day. That man was a dragon among men, just like Ling now, so excellent that he was impeccable in every aspect. It's a pity that they didn't even say a few words to each other. As white lanterns were hung inside and outside the Xiao family, she was not ready to become a wife, so she became a widow in ignorance. In a flash, nearly 10 years have passed. Mrs. Lu listened to the night rain outside the window and looked at the various furnishings placed when she married into the family. She didn't come back to her senses for a long time. She thought that this was how her life would be, and there would be no change until she died alone with these things in her old age. But God still played a joke on her, or gave her a surprise. Just when she was almost numb to life, her elder sister who had been so caring to her suddenly sent her a child. Su Buling. She had heard this name many times. He was stupid, arrogant, and bloodthirsty. Anyway, there was nothing good about him. He was a disobedient and difficult to discipline boy. However, this child was her sworn sister's, so she had to take good care of him no matter what. Even if she was beaten and scolded, she had to do her best. At that time, she held this idea in her mind, and met the boy tremblingly outside Kuishao Street under the heavy protection of the wolf guards. White clothes are whiter than snow, sword-like eyebrows are black, there is a sword and a wine gourd on the waist, and the delicate peach blossom eyes are more beautiful than girls, but they still have the heroic spirit that men should have. It's not a child who came, but a grown-up man, no worse than any man in the world. She remembered that she was stunned at the time, standing under the octagonal archway like a piece of wood, and Yunu pinched her quietly, but she didn't react. It was still that tall boy, who walked in front of her after being introduced, raised his hand to make a junior salute, and woke her up with the voice of Auntie Lu and a bright smile. From then on, the whole world seemed to have changed. Everything that she had never had and never thought of before was found in the boy who should not have had any contact with her. He would speak to her side, pamper her all the time, and go along with her when she was unhappy. Even if she sometimes deliberately complained and said something unreasonable, he would apologize foolishly, fearing that she would be dissatisfied. She knew that Linger was not afraid of her, but was sensible and always indulged her, wanting her to live a happier life. A year passed in a flash before she noticed it. It was as plain as water, as if nothing had happened, but it was more memorable than every day in the past. Mrs. Lu stood up under the dim light, walked to the bed and sat down, and took out the rice paper that she had read countless times from under the pillow. In fact, every time she recalled the bits and pieces of the past year late at night, she knew that she was a little clingy and too nosy as an ant, and even a little unreasonable. Linger had grown up a long time ago. It was natural for a man to have a girl he liked, and it was also natural for him to have contact with the Queen Mother. She shouldn't interfere. But every time she saw Linger with other women, she felt sour in her heart. She was afraid that Linger would get close to others and not treat her well. Every day when she woke up, she would forget everything. She just wanted to know where Linger went, what she did, whether she had eaten, and whether she had been close to other women. After all, there was only one Su Buling in her world now. Without Su Buling, there would be nothing left. Swish swish swish. The sound of fine and dense rain surrounded the boudoir in the courtyard. Mrs. Lu tightly grasped the paper, put it close to her nose, and smelled the ink fragrance. When she was half asleep and half awake, she inexplicably remembered the night of New Year's Eve. Since New Year's Eve, she would think of the scene of that day and the slightly overbearing look that told her not to move almost every night. It turns out that Linger was just pretending. In fact, he is still a stinky man at heart. Fortunately, I am his aunt. Mrs. Lu was in a daze, and seemed to be pinned down by the bad boy again. Her face gradually turned red, her breathing became rapid, and she made a slightly dissatisfied "oh" sound, but she couldn't struggle free. Linger, don't. A faint whisper sounded in the rustling of the night rain. Mrs. Lu's hands tightly grasped the collar of her clothes, her legs under her skirt were tightly entangled, and her instep was arched and gently rubbed on the quilt, a bit like resistance, but she forgot that she was the only one in the room. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 168. The next day. After the rain, the sky clears up. The spring breeze swept across the land, and as the light rain for many days stopped, Chang'an City seemed to transition from winter to spring overnight. Green buds sprouted from the corners of the deep streets and alleys. The early spring swallows were chirping under the eaves of the palace. The warm sun shone on the imperial city and the streets and alleys. Everything was full of vitality as far as the eye could see. As the sun rose in the east, Su Buling got into the carriage again, carrying a bunch of small gifts, and embarked on the road to the palace. When the carriage arrived outside the imperial city, the person who greeted him was finally changed to Chiaoyi, and the carved chariot was also brought out, so there was no need to walk in. It seemed that the Queen Mother's anger had subsided a bit. Su Buling got off the carriage with the gift box and handed the things to Chiaoyi. Just as he was about to enter the palace gate directly, he was startled by a voice saying hello in the distance. Second uncle. Senior Situ. His voice was rich and powerful, but he didn't sound very old. Su Buling turned his head and glanced. Under the towering city wall, Situ Yueming stood with his hands behind his back, carrying a 9-ring sword. Standing in front were 2 young men in rich attire, carrying a sword and a sword. The one wielding the sword was tall, while the one holding the sword was a bit slimmer and taller. They looked like people from the world of martial arts. Lu Yunlin, deputy envoy of the Criminal Investigation Department, stood nearby and spoke with a friendly expression. The 2 sides were not far apart. Situ Yueming clearly noticed Su Buling's appraising gaze. He turned his head and took a look. He was slightly surprised and raised his hand to salute. See Crown Prince Su. Lu Yunlin turned around, was slightly startled, smiled quickly, and raised his hand to salute. Compared with the elders who worked in the imperial court, when the 2 young people heard the name Su Buling, they both squinted their eyes and looked carefully before raising their hands and clasping their fists. There is a saying that if you are not vigorous, how can you be considered a young man? Su Buling was very famous in the past. He was a master of martial arts and was almost hailed as the leader of the younger generation. There were many people who were dissatisfied. Obviously, these 2 peers there is also a bit of arrogance of Wu Wuxuo. Su Buling didn't mind this, because the Situ family was a well-known family and not an ordinary family. He thought for a moment, turned around and walked in front of the 4 of them, nodding slightly. Senior Situ, who are these 2? Most of the orthodox Jianghu people put more emphasis on fame than wealth, and were called seniors by the feudal prince instead of calling them by their names. Situ Yueming's expression was naturally friendly and he raised his hand politely. The prince is too polite to be called senior. These 2 are my juniors, Situ Hu and Tangju. They are somewhat famous in Chang'an, but they will definitely be difficult for the prince to catch. In response to their elders' modesty, Sidu Huiyu and Tang Ju naturally nodded and raised their hands in salute. Su Buring glanced at them and knew something about these two young people. Sidu Huiyu is the youngest son of Sidu Yuejin, the #1 man in the Tianese martial arts world. Because Sidu Yuejin is respected as the sword leader by people in the world, Sidu Huiyu also has the mixed nickname of Little Sword Leader. It is said that he is born with magical sword skills. Kaishan became famous even at a young age before traveling around the world. Tang Ju is the young master of the Tang family in Yuzhou. He is a distant relative of Ningyu. He is slightly less famous, but he is also the leader of the younger generation in Chang'an City. Because Dayo values both civil and military skills, it is difficult to develop a family business just by relying on martial arts. The two of them are currently studying in the capital and making friends. They can be regarded as the future faces of the martial arts family. Su Buling raised his hand gently and said with a smile, "It turns out to be Brother Sidu and Brother Tang, whose names I have admired for a long time." Sidu Huiyu was tall, with a personality similar to that of his father. He had a hearty pulse and did not pay much attention to rules and etiquette. At this time, he laughed and said, "The Crown Prince has been promoted. Tang Juer and I have admired his name for a long time. Ever since the Crown Prince came to Chang'an, we have always wanted to pay him a visit." It's said to be a visit, but it actually means coming to ask for advice. However, Su Buling was infected by the locking dragon goo, and his martial arts skills were inferior to each other. In the past, they might have been on top of each other, but now they are incomparable. Tang Ju just nodded and smiled, accepting Su Buling's polite words. Lu Yunlin stood behind Sidu Yueming, silently showing no intention of coming forward to be polite, so Sidu Yueming opened his mouth to explain. In a few days, the envoys from the Northern Qi dynasty will arrive in Chang'an. The barbarians from the Northern Qi dynasty can't help the Su family's army on the battlefield. They always want to find a place elsewhere. I heard that the Holy One wants to appoint the top 10 warriors. When the time comes, they will definitely take the opportunity to provoke them. Someone and others will. These two juniors were called to give some advice in advance so as not to cause the court to lose face. The Dayo warriors have always been proud of themselves, so Sidu Huiyu and Tang Ju naturally did not take the Northern Qi envoy seriously and came here just to receive advice from the secret guards. At this time, Sidu Huiyu patted his chest. "Second uncle, don't worry. The most capable people in Chang'an City are me and Tang Ju. Even if we risk our lives, we won't let the imperial court lose any face." Tang Ju held the sword hilt with his hand and raised his long eyebrows lightly. "Zoya's master is the Northern Qi imperial master. He ranks among the top 3 in Northern Qi in terms of swordsmanship. However, compared with my father and senior Lu Beiming, he is still half a step behind, and even more so with Sidu Gong. The difference between clouds and mud is that a disciple wants to overturn the table when he comes over. He thinks too highly of himself." Sidu Yueming heard this and shook his head. It is a good thing for young people to be energetic, but warriors do not rely on words to judge their superiority. Only those who stand are qualified to speak. Although you are the only one in Chang'an City, you cannot underestimate the whole world. The younger generation. Speaking of this, Sidu Yueming looked at Su Buling and said with a smile, "If Prince Su had not been infected by the gangster's dragon-locking goo, his chances of winning would be much greater." Su Buling shook his head. "A warrior can only stand or lie down. Once you are useless, and when you are old, you are old. Mentioning the glory of the past is just to comfort yourself. At that time, you will still have to rely on the two brothers." He. Seeing that Su Buling was so open-minded, Sidu Yueming showed some admiration in his eyes and raised his hand. "Aren't all the literati saying, when heaven is going to assign a great responsibility to this person, he must first work hard for his mind and body? The prince does not need to belittle oneself. Once the poison is cured, whoever in the world dares to compete in front of the prince will have to be arrogant. Sidu Huiyu and Tang Ju knew that the locking dragon goo had never been unlocked before, but naturally they would not add insult to injury to the son of a feudal lord at this time, so they also comforted him with a few words. Su Buling just came over to say hello, and without saying much, he nodded slightly and took Xiao Yi into the palace. As Su Buling's figure disappeared inside the city gate, Lu Yunlin took a step forward and asked curiously. "Brother Sidu, the prince has been poisoned since he came to Chang'an, and his martial arts skills are only hearsay. According to your opinion, how powerful can the Prince Su be if he ignores the dragon locking goo and uses all his strength?" When Sidu Yueming heard this, he frowned and thought for a moment. According to rumors, the prince was able to sweep away the horse bandits in the western regions before he was 16 years old. He was ambushed in the Weha River the year before last, and he killed more than 100 bandits by himself. He didn't escape until he was exhausted and poisoned. If there is no locking dragon goo, it should be no problem to fight with me. Sidu Huiyu frowned slightly. There are hundreds of royal guards in Weha, so it's impossible for one person to kill them. As for going out alone, the only people killed were horse bandits who didn't have enough to eat and a bandit scout leader. It wouldn't be impossible if it were me. Tang Ju rubbed the hilt of the sword at his waist and smiled softly. Everyone in the city likes to exaggerate. If a martial artist doesn't fight with a real sword and a real spear, he can't tell who is better or worse. This naturally means that Su Buling has been praised too much in the world. Sidu Yueming thought for a while and shook his head slightly. Wu Sushi must have been very powerful in the past with his famous reputation. If you are infected by the dragon lock goo, if you do it regardless of your full strength, you will die or be disabled. If a warrior dares to risk his life, he is a no one can say what the outcome will be. A few people chatted casually. Lu Yunlin pondered for a while, nodded, and did not interrupt again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 169. The sun shone on the cornice building. Su Buling walked through the veranda and came to the Queen Mother's bedroom. The big cauldron has not been taken down yet. I don't know whether it is because it is too heavy to move around, or whether it is because it is prepared for trouble. On the steps of the bedroom, the Queen Mother finally got dressed. Wearing a red palace skirt, the phoenix pattern is outlined with gold thread on the waist belt, and the gold hairpin is inserted diagonally in the bun. Her gourd-like figure is perfectly outlined, making her look solemn and yet bright, and she is in the thick and majestic palace. There seems to be only this little bit of red in between. Recently they met each other 3 times, and twice the Queen Mother was not dressed and once she was disheveled. Suddenly she was so neatly dressed that Su Buring didn't even recognize her. After comparing her secretly, she actually looked better without clothes, but obviously she couldn't say this out loud. See the Queen Mother. Su Buletinling walked forward slowly, raised his hand and gave a junior salute. The Queen Mother gently nodded, recalled the normal encounters in the past, and hooked her with her finger. Xiao Buletinling, come here quickly. However, the words were no longer as affectionate as before, and she seemed to keep a distance. Su Buring was not surprised. He walked behind the Queen Mother and did not take the initiative to get close to her. The two came to the main hall and sat down, stretching their legs under the table as usual. It was still a bit cold in early February, and the stove was still burning. The maids brought all kinds of dishes to the table, and brought over the warm duan yu shao. The Queen Mother waved her hand, then she all retreated and closed the door. The splendid main hall fell silent, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. The Queen Mother's dignified and quiet expression disappeared without a trace in an instant, and her palace shoes lightly kicked Su Buling's legs under the table. Sit tight. Su Buling retracted his legs with a smile and sat upright. The Queen Mother hasn't calmed down yet. The Queen Mother pursed her lips. She had apologized last time and her anger had subsided, but it was impossible to forget about being taken advantage of. Moreover, she misunderstood Su Buling last time and bit Su Buling fiercely. Su Buling had not seen any movement in the past few days. She waited left and right but no one came. She tossed and turned and couldn't sleep well, thinking that Su Buling didn't come. When Ling was angry, she naturally became angry too. It's probably like, "How dare you be angry with me?" means. The Queen Mother sat on the main seat, hesitated for a moment, and looked sideways at Su Buling's wrist. "It was an accident last time. Are you healed?" Su Buling lifted up his sleeves, revealing his fair wrists. "It's just a flesh wound. It'll be fine after a few days of rest. The Queen Mother doesn't need to worry about it." The Queen Mother relaxed a little, thought for a while, then acted like an elder, and spread her palms with a cold face. "Return the belly band to me." Su Buling's face froze and he blinked. "It seems, I forgot to bring it." Snap. The Queen Mother slapped her hands on the table and stared with a pair of beautiful eyes filled with annoyance. "Forgot to bring it? Are you kidding me?" Su Buling shook his head and chuckled. "I was so anxious to leave the palace last time that I didn't dare to carry the Queen Mother's personal belongings with me at all times. I didn't know where they were hidden when I went back. I searched for a long time but couldn't find them." "Not found? So casual." The Queen Mother's chest rose and fell, and she patted the table again. "How could you do this? Only I have the lotus, hidden carp, and if it is lost or spread, how can I behave as a human being?" "Don't worry, Queen Mother. Prince Su's palace is heavily guarded. It won't be lost. It's just hidden and forgotten. I'll go back and look for it." The Queen Mother could not rest assured. After thinking for a moment, her face suddenly darkened. She leaned closer and said nervously, "Hongluan won't see it, right?" Su Buling shook his head and comforted, "No, if Aunt Lu sees it, my legs will have been broken." The Queen Mother was so angry that she laughed. "Did you know that your legs would be broken? If I don't castrate you, it's because Hongluan has a good temper." After staring at Su Buling for a moment, the Queen Mother could only say coldly, "Since you didn't find it, what did you do in the palace?" With a calm expression, Su Buling picked up the prepared gift from the side. "I offended the Queen Mother several times in the past few days. When I returned home, I wanted to apologize to the Queen Mother, so I prepared some small items. However, I have been thinking about the incurable dragon lock poison these past few days. I was so upset that I accidentally put it. I forgot my belly band, please forgive me." "Yeah." The Queen Mother was half convinced, always feeling that Su Buling had kept the belly band secretly and would not give it to her. But Su Buling really refused to give it to her, and she seemed helpless. After all, Su Buling had the initiative in this matter. The Queen Mother hesitated for a while, so she had to put it down and looked at the wine jar, rouge box, and snack box. The rouge box was easy to talk about. I had mentioned it to Su Buling before, but the box of snacks surprised the Queen Mother. She likes to eat candied fruit made by an old shop in Chang'an City, so naturally she recognizes the snack box that the shop specially prepares for dignitaries. It is obviously bought from that shop she likes. "Su Buling, how do you know I like to eat this?" The Queen Mother brought the snack box in front of her, opened it, and took a look. There was a dazzling array of preserved fruits in various colors. Thinking of the sour and sweet taste, her mouth was naturally filled with saliva and she pursed her lips quietly. When Su Buling saw this very small movement, he felt a little more at ease and his expression was more casual. "The Queen Mother has lived in the palace for a long time and cannot go out for a walk all year round, so I asked Aunt Lu and made special preparations." The Queen Mother suddenly thought about it and leaned a little closer. "Hongluan really told you what I like to eat?" With her temper, she should deliberately say something that I don't like, such as peaches, frozen persimmons. It seems that the Queen Mother knows the temperament of her plastic best friend very well. Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, remained silent for a while, looked around, pretending to be afraid of being overheard, approached the Queen Mother and whispered. Of course I didn't dare to ask directly. What I said at that time was, the Queen Mother doesn't think about tea and rice, and the dishes cooked in the kitchen are not as delicious as Aunt Lou's. Does the Queen Mother not like to eat, or has she lost her appetite? And then Aunt Lou said the Queen Mother is greedy and told me all the things that the Queen Mother likes. The Queen Mother was stunned for a moment, and when she came to her senses, she laughed, raised her hand and poked Su Buring on the shoulder with her finger. You heartless person, Hong Luan treats you with great care, but you actually used clever tricks to let her know that she has to hang you up and beat you. Although she said this, the Queen Mother's eyes were obviously filled with joy and pride, as if she had gained the upper hand in front of her best friend. Su Buling wanted this effect. He raised his eyebrows and whispered, "Isn't this to make amends to the Queen Mother? Only the Queen Mother and I know about this matter. Please don't tell Aunt Lou, otherwise I will never be able to do it again in this life. I want to go out again." The Queen Mother understood Mrs. Lou's temper best, and nodded with a smile, "Don't worry, I am very strict with my words. If you say you won't tell others about your poem, then no one else will know about it, even Hong Luan won't. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 170. During the chat, Su Buling stretched his legs under the table again. The Queen Mother obviously saw it, but she didn't kick him again. She just looked at the snack box, wondering what she was thinking, and her eyes were full of pride and anger. Su Buling shook his head secretly. After all, she was a woman who was not experienced in the world. No matter how smart her brain was, it was useless. She would still be tricked. The Queen Mother was in a much better mood. She put aside the matter of her belly band for the time being and looked at the rouge box on the table. Xian Zizai has something new. Su Buling smiled brightly, picked up 2 boxes of rouge, and first placed the red orchid nectar in front of the Queen Mother. It's a new lipstick this year, but it doesn't change much. The Queen Mother picked it up, opened the lid and looked at it for a few times, then brought it to her nose and smelled it, nodded slightly, and then looked at the other box in Su Buring's hand, a little curious. "This is..." Su Buling then picked up the camellia butter recommended by Aunt Lou, opened it and placed it in front of the Queen Mother. "When I was shopping at Xian Zizai, I happened to see this camellia butter. The price is not high, but in my opinion, the color of red orchid nectar is a bit brighter. Although it is very beautiful, it is different from the Queen Mother's dignified and majestic look. The temperament doesn't quite match, and the color is too bright and overwhelms the Queen Mother's own color, which seems to overwhelm the Queen Mother. But this camellia butter is different, just like the woman picking lotus, the lotus leaf skirt is cut in one color, and the hibiscus blooms on both sides of the face. You can't see anyone entering the pool, but when you hear the song, you feel someone is coming. It is clear but not demonic, plain but not bland, and complements the Queen Mother's appearance. There is no need to deliberately embellish it. It is better to think of it this way." The soft words reached her ears, and the Queen Mother gradually froze on the spot, staring at Su Buling with her beautiful eyes. Su Buling, as calm as ever, placed the rouge box in front of the Queen Mother. Seeing that the Queen Mother was a little dazed, she frowned slightly in confusion. "Queen Mother? Oh." The Queen Mother finally came back to her senses. Her eyes were full of surprise and inexplicability. She subconsciously raised her hand to hook the hair beside her ears and sat up straighter. "Not bad, the lotus leaf skirt is cut in one color, and the hibiscus is spread to both sides of the face. You can't see it when you enter the pool. When you hear the song, you will feel that someone is coming. The poem is not bad." The Queen Mother pretended to be calm, but she couldn't hide the loss in her eyes. She was obviously still thinking about the words and poems just now. Su Buling secretly smiled in his heart, took the opportunity to sit a little closer, looked directly at the Queen Mother's beautiful face, and tilted his head to look at her. "Would you like to give it a try, Queen Mother?" "Try it?" The Queen Mother felt a little restless. She looked at Su Buling and then at the rouge box. Her mind was in a mess and she didn't know what to think. She actually obeyed and picked up the lip pencil in the box and looked around for the bronze mirror. Su Buling shook his head and chuckled. He raised his hand and took the red brush with lipstick. He sat a little closer, his eyes were pure and flawless, and he put the lip pencil to the Queen Mother's lips. The alluring beauty was dressed in a red dress, sitting sideways on the carpet, looking up at the beautiful young man in front of her. With the magnificent but not popular palace, the scene was breathtakingly beautiful. There was obviously some confusion in the Queen Mother's clear eyes, but she didn't move for some reason. After a slight hesitation, the tip of the pen touched her lips, and she applied the lip gloss softly and meticulously. "Hey!" The cold feeling finally brought the Queen Mother back to her senses. Reason finally prevailed, suppressing the thousands of emotions in his heart. The Queen Mother leaned back slightly to avoid the brush, covered her lips with her red sleeves, glanced at Su Buling in a panic, thought about it, and laughed again. No matter how big or small, there is a man who paints a woman's lips, it's really. Su Buling was neither arrogant nor impetuous, and put down the lip pencil with a natural expression. "Actually, it's nothing. I often help Aunt Lu comb her hair, and she doesn't care about it." The Queen Mother clenched her hands tightly, shook her head, closed the rouge box, and smiled dignifiedly. "Let's eat. I like things very much. I'm interested." Su Buling nodded and chuckled, picked up the warmed wine bottle, and began to pour and drink. "I came here today and brought 2 jars of wine. The apricot blossom wine produced in the Jiangnan water town is considered fruit wine. It has a soft taste with a floral aroma. It is the most popular among women. It tastes soft and has no punch. It still has some staying power but not much. It is purely for drinking. Add to the fun." The Queen Mother did not drink alcohol on weekdays, but after being persuaded several times to drink, she did not refuse. She drank with Su Buling in a small sip, and her expression was still that of an elder. In the main hall with the doors and windows closed, 2 people sat together without anyone disturbing them. The atmosphere kept wandering between alienation and harmony. Soon after drinking for 3 rounds, the Queen Mother's pretty face was slightly flushed, and her forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat due to her abundant natural juices. Her eyes were like a pool of clear water, and she still pretended to be calm and spoke calmly. "And Su Buling." Thump. A muffled sound sounded in the main courtyard. After Su Buling drank a pot of Duan Yu Shao, he pretended that he was too drunk, swayed a few times drunkenly, and lay down on the carpet with his arms and legs spread out. The Queen Mother was talking about the family's shortcomings. When she saw Su Buling lying down, she blinked her eyes and took a moment to react. "Why did you lie down again?" The Queen Mother thought for a while, climbed up from the carpet to Su Buling, held Su Buling's wrist and felt his pulse carefully. After she found that there was no problem, she breathed a sigh of relief and leaned over to look at Su Buling's brows. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" After calling a few words softly, Su Buling had no response. The Queen Mother was silent for a moment, sitting next to Su Buling, looking down carefully, staring for a long time, but she didn't know what she was looking at. The wide main courtyard was silent, with only 2 steady breaths. It was unknown how long it took before the Queen Mother came back to her senses, raised her hand and wanted to scratch Su Buling's tall nose, but she stopped halfway. After a little hesitation, the Queen Mother still acted dignified and called out loudly. "Chiao Yi, send the prince to the side hall to rest for a while." Yes. Chiaoyi and several palace maids pushed open the door and came in. Seeing Su Buling lying down again, they carried the unconscious Su Buling out with a smile. The Queen Mother sat alone at the table, looking at the box of rouge on it, and then looked at the sky outside. It was not yet noon, and it was still early. The lotus leaf skirt is cut in the same color, and the lotus blossoms on both sides of the face. I can't see it when I enter the pond, but I realize someone is coming when I hear the song. The soft murmur sounded in the hall. The Queen Mother hesitated for a while, but still couldn't help it. She stood up and walked to the soft couch, picked up the bronze mirror that had been with her for many years, and trotted to the table to sit down, opened the rouge box, and painted carefully in front of the bronze mirror. Red jade half opened the face of the Bodhisattva, and cinnabar thickened the lips of willow branches. After the Queen Mother finished dressing up, she looked at her cheek in the bronze mirror with satisfaction. The woman in the mirror was mature and charming, still beautiful, but it was a pity that she was no longer the little girl of the age of marriage. Even if she had 1,000 styles, who could appreciate it? The Queen Mother stared at the mirror blankly, and her slightly complacent expression gradually became dull. After a long time, a faint sigh sounded in the main hall.